Welcome to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family, and through these conversations, we look at work across Australia that's focused on giving all young people the opportunity to change their future through the power of education. And this week, we're looking at the important role of families in supporting their child's education, and doing that in partnership with the Smith Family through our family partnership coordinators. Now, today I'm talking to Ben Blowers. Ben's been a family partnership coordinator in Queensland, and he's now a team leader supporting colleagues in Tasmania. He'll be sharing about his experience in directly working with families, some insights into their experiences, and the difference that we're making in partnership with those families. Welcome, Ben. It's great to have you with us today. You know very well that we're a children's education charity. So the question we always start with on the podcast is, what's been your most memorable education moment?
I grew up in Canberra, and I went through the Canberra or the ACT system. So I went to college, and I was really undecided about what I wanted to do, whether it was university or go off and do a gap year or go travelling. And I wasn't really sure. And it was actually my year 11 maths teacher who took me aside after one of the classes and kind of had a frank conversation with me, which at the time I felt a little bit. I wasn't upset, but I think it was the first time I'd had that sort of frank conversation with the teacher, and he just sort of put it to me like, "Look, there's a long time ahead of you. What do you actually want to do?" And at that point, I didn't really know. So he took the time to have a bit of a chat, and long story short, I kind of decided that I would take a bit of a gap year and to sort of take my time and see where that ended up. And I think the fact that I'm sitting here in these roles now, I kind of thank him for that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? In terms of having people really connect with us and engage and kind of personalize things in terms of thinking about our future. And it very much, I think, relates to the role that you've played at the Smith Family with our family partnership coordinators. And, the Smith Family, very well, we provide financial support, access to learning and mentoring programs, and then this kind of personal support for families. And the premise of that is that parents play an incredibly important role in supporting their child's education, and arguably the most influential role over and above schools and teachers in terms of a marker of educational success and outcomes. So just be great for you to tell us a little bit about the role of a family partnership coordinator and why it's so important from your perspective.
Well, what I always say to my, if I'm hiring a new family partnership coordinator, is that the partnership part of the job title is actually the most important bit, because as you know very well, a big part of what that role is really trying to address those barriers to education. But barrier to education can be almost anything in the communities that we work in and with the families that we support. And I think building genuine partnerships with parents who ultimately are the experts on their children, and I think getting it to that point where there's that genuine trust and genuine credibility, I think is the word I'm looking for, where you can get into those deeper conversations around what is actually affecting, the ability for a child to attend school, whether it's, sort of something external in their community that they're facing, or whether it's a challenge that they've got with, inside their family, or, something in the school. But anyone, and I think anyone who's a parent would understand that anything can make that transition to getting the child out the door in the mornings difficult. So I think the key role of the family partnership coordinator is to not to advise, but to be that sort of sounding board for parents, and a little bit of a helpful friend in terms of suggesting where we could look to try fit some of those other scaffoldings around the family to really help them achieve whatever it is that they're looking for.
Yeah, look, it's such an incredibly important role, and it's particularly important today if we think about the many life challenges that so many of our families experience. If you look at the profile of families, low-income families, often limited employment experience, supporting you know, people in the family who've got health issues, mental health issues, living with a disability, limited digital access. It's multiple barriers at the one time. And we've been really leaning into that at the Smith family and strengthening the practice of our work with our family partnership coordinators. Can you tell us a little bit about the practice, how we think about it, what we do, and if you can summarize what it looks like day to day?
Yeah, I think because when you step into this role and you're dealing with families, particularly at the beginning, as I talked about that trust piece before, you need some sort of framework in order to be able to really be able to kind of get those ins and start that relationship process. So, we have a family practice framework that has been developed over I think over the last 5 years. I think we've just ticked over 5 years of it, and that sort of allows a bit of a roadmap, or gives you a set of tools that you can use to help build those relationships with families. And I think you find that once you start to use those tools, that's when you do start to be able to open up those conversations and have those really good, genuine interactions with families. A day in a life is a little bit sort of tricky to kind of to summarize really quickly, but depending on the community that the family partnership coordinator is working in, or the stage of where they're at in terms of that relationship building, it could very well be a case of, this time of year we'd be checking in with all our year 6 students who are starting to think very deeply about year 7 and that big transition piece that happens there. It's a time that does cause a little bit of anxiety for parents, particularly if it's the first time through. School's changed quite a bit from when we went through that as a lived experience. So a family partnership coordinator now would be having those conversations, and I suppose trying to find out from the families what it is that's worrying them, if anything, and providing them with some support around around allaying some of those fears or allaying some of those concerns. Well, I can give you an example of one of my team members at the moment who has a family who are new to Australia, so they've only been here for a year or so, came from a very different school system and very different background. Had a little bit of problems sort of fitting in because of language barriers and whatnot. So very nervous about the change to high school. And one of my team have been working really closely with the parents to set up some time with the high school, make sure that there's personal introductions from the front office staff, so that when the family walk in there for the first time next year as a parent of that school, they see some familiar faces and they've got some of those personal connections already. So wouldn't always go as deep as that, but certainly just as a bit of an example of the type of things that we do.
As I understand our work of the team, it's kind of proactive and it's reactive, isn't it? So we're thinking proactively about those critical transition points, so into high school, into year 11 and 12, so really leaning in then, but equally being reactive when there are problems that emerge, and that happens in family life, and it particularly happens for families on low incomes. And the thing I love about our coaching, as we call it, our coaching practice model, is it very much works from the strengths of the families. I think we very much assume that all parents want the best for their children, and it's how do we kind of walk alongside them and support them and help them kind of be the best they can be for their children. Ben, with cost of living pressures, there's particularly acute challenges at the moment for so many of our families. And, I've just been talking to students in the last couple of weeks and also team members, and you hear some terrible stories about how cost of living pressures really impacts family life, and particularly finding suitable accommodation and housing. And there's obviously big knock-on effects for a child's education. I'm particularly interested in what you're hearing about some of the key challenges for the families that we're working with and what that means for their child's education.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you say, cost of living is a huge burden for the communities and the team, the families we work with. Housing continues to be an issue, but I think in Hobart and in our community of southern Tasmania, access to employment is also an issue because of mobility factors. We've unfortunately had quite a few bus services cancelled in in the Hobart region from our northern suburbs. So access to the city and access to services is now costing more because of having to drive to services rather than catch a bus, or having to pay for parking in the city, trying to find parking, getting a parking ticket in, and it kind of snowballs a little bit, and that may lead to disengagement with services. We have been really fortunate in Tasmania that we've been able to get a lot of internet packages and devices out to families, and I think from the last 2 years that I've been here, we've been able to get out over 200 odd devices out to families, and that's really gone a long way to kind of address some of these issues, because although the intention of those devices is for the students to be able to access some of our programs and whatnot, it has also opened up a window to telehealth and other services for the parents as well.
That's fantastic. And it has been great to see the progress we're making on digital inclusion. Providing over 6,000 digitally connected laptops with all that additional support. And there's obviously immediate benefits for children in their education. But of course, everything is online in terms of government services and increasingly social services. So great that we can support families in that level of connectivity, particularly where there's those challenges in transport, in getting to the services that are really, really important. And housing being a critical one at the moment, as you've rightly said, Ben. And I was just in Melbourne earlier this week talking to team members, and they were talking about some really concerning situations for families who are family units, sleeping on the lounge room floor of other family members. You think about the risks and the disruption of that, or sleeping in tents in backyards of other families. So all these things are particularly concerning, and we've got some heavy lifting to do as a nation to really get the kind of safety net we need to support families, and particularly vulnerable families and families on low incomes. So there's no question there are big challenges, but I also know when I talk to families that our family partnership coordinators play a really important role as connectors. And you summarised it well in terms of connecting with school, with services, with other families, and all those things that we need to support families effectively. So I'm really confident in the impact that we make. And I'm just wondering if there's a particular story that's kind of in your mind when you think about the kind of the difference that we make, because we know that the right support at the right time makes a huge impact for people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that really sticks out in my mind from when I was a family partnership coordinator in Queensland. So I was on the Sunshine Coast in Caboolture, and that was a fairly mature community for the Smith family. Had been there for quite a while, and which meant that we'd been working with families sometimes in excess of 10, 15 years. And I remember dropping off a device to this family who had a year 8 student. So I had a year 8 student and a year 10 student, actually. And I remember dropping off the device because they were doing part of our digital access program, and just having a conversation with the mother, who I'd only spoken to a few times because she's very self-sufficient. She'd ring me every now and again just to sort of check in and say hi, but she didn't really need an awful lot of intense support or anything like that. And she told me her story, and she explained to me that for her, when she first came on to scholarship, or when she first became eligible for our scholarship, it was at a really low point in her life. And she said that what she had found was that everybody who had worked with her from the Smith family had been very supportive and non-judgmental, and had always been there for that support, and there'd been little wobbles along her particular journey. But at the time when I had dropped off the device to her, she was in the process of buying a house. Her daughters were excelling at school. And she said to me, look, thank you. I can't overstate how great this small level of support, but consistent support across the years, has been to my family. And I think if we had this conversation with one of the other, hundreds or so family partnership coordinators around the country, I think that story would replicate in different forms. But honestly, I think it's the best thing about what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That longitudinal support is so critical, isn't it? And that's a wonderful story about someone who'd had those challenges, but obviously kind of built a foundation in her life, and great that she was thinking about a very different future. But the long-term support, the wraparound dimensions to our work are, I think, are incredibly important. Ben, I mean, given your work with many families and working with our team and families who experience big challenges, you would be aware that there's a lot of kind of misconceptions, I think, in the broader community about families on low incomes. What comes to mind to you in terms of the most acute ones?
I think, having worked in Queensland and in Tasmania, I've sort of seen this in both areas. And I think the biggest misconception is that this is something that people have made a choice to be in this situation, or have, made a series of bad choices to be in that situation. When I think the truth is more that it's circumstantial in the vast majority of people's cases that we support and we work with. And I think that is the number one thing. A lot of families that we work with, it's not because of something something that's negative or whatnot. It's just a circumstantial death in the family, an illness, an accident at work. It's all of these things that, without having a good network around you at that particular time when the stumble happens, that it's so easy to fall into that space. And it's quite, I think, difficult. It takes a long time, I think, for families to be able to get back to where they were.
Yeah, Ben, I think that's a great way of summarising the experience of so many people. The data bears that out. 70% of people who experience poverty move out of that in a short period of time with the right supports. It's only a small number of people who experience that kind of persistent experience of poverty. Yeah, that's a great way of articulating the reality of so many people. So, Ben, it's probably a surprise to you as it is for me that we're coming to the end of the year. Like, how did that happen? But what's kind of, tell us maybe the highlight for you from this year, and what's exciting for you about next year.
I think getting so many devices out to families here in Tasmania, and to a point where I wouldn't say that we've been able to solve the digital access or the digital drought in parts of Tas, but we've gone a really long way to address it, and we've got more of that coming up early next year as well to support our reading program, student to student. For me, there's a series of education reforms that are happening in Tasmania, and I am very excited to see how they continue to bear fruit.
Fantastic. That's a very positive note, Ben, because obviously we know that we've got some work to do as a nation in terms of bridging the gap in educational outcomes from young people who experience disadvantage to their peers. So great to hear that optimism that you had. So Ben, thank you for your time today and telling us a bit about our work at the Smith family, but also really giving us some insights into the challenges, but also the resilience of the families that we support. And thank you for joining us on Conversations with the Smith family. If you'd like to learn more about the work of the Smith family, or indeed hear other conversations that we're having, please jump on to thesmithfamily.com.au. Thank you.